It's always fun to welcome a musician for the first time to Loudwire Nights and learn a bit more about their music and life. This evening, we welcome Andy Biersack, frontman for Black Veil Brides. Thank you for your time, Andy. Appreciate it. Hope you and yours are doing well.
Very well. I mean, obviously there's been a shift in how our daily life goes over the last couple of months, as with everybody. But yeah, we're doing well. The band's doing well. We're working on a new record right now, and we've got a record coming out in a few weeks. And yeah, everything's going really well. But you mentioned before we started that you've got a new puppy. My wife and I talk about how our pets this is the greatest time they've ever had in their whole lives here, because both my wife and I tour. And so, normally we're gone for a certain amount of time, or they're staying with sitters, or my dog will often go to my parents' house in Ohio when we're on tour. And so they're just having the best time ever that we're constantly here, living with them at all times now.
For sure. They're going to miss you now that they've gotten used to seeing you guys all the time. They're going to be like, wait, what happened? Let's go back to the other schedule.
I know.
Better. Yeah, we're going to touch on all of those things you just mentioned, starting with the Black Veil Brides debut album. We Stitch These Wounds turns 10 years old on July 20th, and to commemorate the anniversary, the band has re-recorded the album and called it ReStitch These Wounds. It's going to be out July 31st. There's so many ways to mark a record's anniversary. Why did you want to full-on re-record these songs?
Well, it goes back to really the minute that I heard the completed record in my car in 2010. I mean, to give some kind of context and backstory, we were signed to a small subsidiary label, and there wasn't really any budget to speak of. We were making this on less than a shoestring budget in terms of what we had available to us, and we didn't have any in-studio experience. The only experience I had was recording in friends' home studios, or, the kind of rent a studio situation back where I'm from in Cincinnati. In moving to LA, I'd never been in a professional recording studio in Los Angeles. We were doing demos in the apartment that Jake and I shared, and just kind of, doing our best to build these songs up. And we were also given the task. We had done our first kind of mini tour in the winter of 2009, where we only did a handful of cities. And as soon as we got home, the task was given to us, okay, you have to do the record now. And so a large amount of the record was material that was stuff that I had written back home, combined with material that Jake and Jinx had written on their own prior to even meeting me. And we just combined those things. And the result was kind of this strange combination of a band that maybe lyrically and vocally is inspired by the Misfits and Social Distortion, and musically is inspired by Metallica and Iron Maiden and metal bands. So it's kind of this mishmash of things. And we loved what we were coming up with, but we didn't really have the wherewithal to record it in the way that we wanted to. And again, we didn't have the budget to do so. So on that first record, we were recording in what is traditionally a jingle studio, where they record commercial jingles, very small studio in the Valley in Los Angeles. We didn't have the budget to have proper day-long situations where we could pay engineers. So we were recording between the hours of 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. When these engineers had time off. They basically were getting, a little bit of extra cash to do this gig in the middle of the night. So it was just from beginning to end, it was more about ambition than actualization when it came to the record. And I remember sitting in my car outside of El Torito, that is no longer there, in Burbank, and listening to the record and going, yeah, this does not sound how we wanted it to. This is not sonically, the songs were there, but sonically it just didn't fit with what we wanted it to be. And so from the moment that we got the record back, it was more about, well, this will serve its purpose. We're proud of and we love the songs, but it sounds, to me, I always liken it to the early Samhain records, where you can almost hear a toilet flushing in the background. You know that it was recorded at somebody's house. With this record, it kind of had that same vibe. So from the minute that we listened to the record, we knew it wasn't up to par sonically, but we didn't really let it deter us from moving forward. And so the record came out. It was a top 40 record. We had picked up steam with our audience, and we were kind of pushed into the world where we wound up getting signed to a major label. And by the time 2013 rolled around, we had been doing some recording on our own. We had worked with John Feldman. Jake had started learning kind of the craft of producing on a much larger scale. He had recorded all the guitar parts for Wretched and Divine, a record that we did with John Feldman. And we felt like, well, you know what, we could probably do this record again, which is so funny to think that you would redo a record 3 years after its release. But, when you're in that stage in your career, 3 years feels like forever. So we were like, let's do this again. So we actually started like kind of a hashtag thing, early Twitter hashtag of like, we stitch these wounds 2013. And we were trying to get pressure from like fan support to put on our old label to let us do it. Unfortunately, they were not interested in having, and understandably so, not having a competing product with a record that's only been out for 3 years at that point. And so we had to wait until the clause within the contract allowed for us to be able to do re-recordings. And once that time had elapsed, it just became logical that let's just wait until it's 10 years and then we'll do it then. So the derivation of this project was years ago, and it's been a long time in the making.
Wow, I learned so much out of that answer. First of all, I didn't know jingle studios were a thing, so thank you for educating me on that. If that was the reaction you had when you first heard "We Stitch These Wounds," okay, no, this isn't what we were intending. When you hear "Re-Stitch These Wounds," now that it's complete and on the verge of being released on July 31st, what do you think? Are you completely satisfied? What are some of the major differences?
You know, I would say that you kind of look at films, right, where there's like there's the big audience for I'm a comic book guy, so people love the Snyder cut, right? Like of Justice League, release the Snyder cut. It's a big thing. Mm-hmm. I've kind of my friend Ryan Downey, who makes the joke that this is the release the Black Veil Brides cut. This is how we intended for this record to sound 10 years ago, and for better or for worse, you know, this is what we would have wanted this record to be. What's important to note, though, is that we're not trying to replace the record that was our debut album, and the thing that many people, it was the entryway for people into the band. We're not trying to replace that or take away people's positive memories of that record. This is meant to be more of a supplementary thing of like, this is how we would have liked for this to have sound 10 years ago. And, you know, now that we have the capacity to do it on our own and to make it the way we wanted to, here's how we think this should have sounded. The differences are, you know, just from a musician standpoint, we're obviously a much better band than we were back then. You enter new things into the equation. Our drummer Cece, who's been in the band for since the touring cycle for that record, but was not in the band when the record was recorded, he did not play on that album, and he is a tremendous drummer. So it's great to be able to get him on these songs, many of which we've been playing live for years, and he's been adding his flair to them, and that's kind of how, for us, we've grown to know these songs. And then also just from the production standpoint of Jake and Jinx are both producers in their own right. They work on their own music as well as producing records for other artists. They know what they're doing in the studio. And Jake, I think, in particular, knew how he wanted to produce this record. And so it's just sonically, it's so much better. Now, vocally, for me, the big distinction is that I've actually put time and effort into my voice over the last 10 years, and particularly the last 5 years, making sure that I actually know what I'm doing. At the time, I was 18 years old when we did the bulk of this record, and I had no idea what to do in terms of singing in the studio. The melodies I was writing are strange and really at the lowest element of my register. I wasn't pushing myself vocally because I didn't really have much of a range. And over the years, I've been very fortunate to work with John Feldman, who's helped me with my voice a lot. And I'm extremely fortunate to be married to an incredible singer who has taught me how to take care of my voice and do all these things to expand my range. And so the biggest thing for me is to be able to show evolutionary growth in terms of the vocals on this record. And I think that's been one thing that people have been noticing is that, you know, that I really did put in time and effort to make sure these songs were sung in a way that was a little bit more powerful. Now, there is one difference there in that the screaming on the first record is done in a way that was not what you would say the right way to do it. And so there's a level of intensity in that is a little bit different because I'm destroying my voice as I'm doing it. Mm-hmm. Over the years of touring, I've had to teach myself how to do screaming in a way that won't destroy my voice. Because, you know, I can't have a 60 show tour and only make it through 3 before my voice is gone. So I've had to learn how to do that the proper way. So there's a tonal difference in terms of the screaming from the first version to this one. I prefer the current one because it's got to me, it's a little bit more menacing and it's a little bit more, I don't want to say whispery, but creepier, and has a little bit more, the delivery is a little bit stronger. But I'm sure that there are fans who will prefer the old version. But again, that's why there's both.
Right. Just to go back to something you touched on, I was going to share this. The band just put out Perfect Weapon, right? But you first shared the re-recorded version of Sweet Blasphemy back in June. And the top comment on that YouTube video is, his voice got so much smoother, holy S. So to your point, yes, people are absolutely noticing that. And I was going to ask you, what has maturity taught you about taking care of your voice?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's one of those things where my wife, Juliet, is an incredible vocalist. And it's shameful to say now, but I did not do vocal warm-ups. When we first started touring, I didn't use any kind of like lozenges or throat sprays or anything. I was just, for the better part of the first part of my career, the first couple of years of my 20s, I was just drinking excessively, and that was my vocal lube, so to speak. And, there were times, I remember a tour that we did with Avenged Sevenfold early on, and it was an arena tour, and I would drink a bottle of red wine, like walk around the stage with a bottle of red wine, and there's almost no liquid that could be worse for your singing voice than dry, hard, acidic red wine. So, there's just so many mistakes that I had made when I was younger that, now I'm in my late 20s, the ability to be able to kind of have a perspective on it and spend time working on my craft and making sure that I can deliver at a consistent level, both live and in the studio. Those are things I've taken more seriously in my life now.
As you were working on the new versions of these songs, must have had all kinds of flashbacks from working on the debut album. What is your favorite memory from working on that record, and maybe one that you wish would go away?
I think my favorite memories are just the idea that we're doing it. You know what I mean? There's not, because it was kind of this rushed thing, and there wasn't a lot of like the kind of pomp and circumstance of a studio recording and all that. A lot of it just comes down to the fact that at 18 years old, I'm sitting in a studio of any kind, and this dream that I have is coming together, and these guys that are in the band with me, we're in this kind of, we're starting this mission together. And the feeling of the first part of the first chapter, the prologue to the whole story, like that's substantive enough to me to be kind of the touchstone moment that I look back on and go, that's where it all started. So I think that you'd be hard pressed to find something that would replace that, because you only get one beginning. But I will say that because of where we're at as a band now and all of the things we've gone through over the last decade, this feels like a second chance to start again. Do you know what I mean? In the sense that, we've got a new member of the band who has just been a tremendous shot of adrenaline for all of us. As a band, we are more connected than we've ever been. As friends, we're more connected than we've ever been. I've said it a few times, but, Jake and I used to live together, and I don't think we were as close of friends then as we are now. And it's just been, overall, the making of this record and reestablishing our roots, so to speak, has been hugely inspirational to all of us, not just from a musical standpoint, from just a personal standpoint. And that's what's led ultimately into, now we're, 7 or 8 songs into a new full-length record already.
I want to touch on that in just a minute, but is there anything about 10 years ago or when you were recording the album that you're like, oh, I'm so thankful we don't have to relive that?
Yeah, I mean, I think doing it in the middle of the night randomly, I'd get a call and be like, hey, I got 2 hours. Can you come track vocals? And then I'd go, and there's other things, just the stress of not being a seasoned songwriter and trying to come up with things on the fly. It's a much more stressful situation when you don't have the bevy of knowledge to kind of play with. Right. Now, when I go into the studio, I know what I'm doing. I know the toys that I'm playing with. In some ways you have a certain element of like the randomness that can happen, and that can be very exciting when you're just trying to figure it out. But I would say that I actually very much prefer the fact that now I'm not being called in at random hours to come up with a song on the fly and freaking out that it's not going to be good enough, and oh my God, I don't like this, but we have no choice because the record has to come out. Like the greatest gift that I've gotten is the ability to have time to make the art.
I love it. I rewatched your first music video ever for Knives and Pens. What do you think of your performance in that video when you watch it back? And did younger you have any idea what kind of a ride he was about to embark on in this music biz?
I think the appropriate answer would be no, it's all been surprising. But the real answer is I believe that I just assumed that everything was going to work out for me as a musician from the time I was 3 years old. I've been overly confident to the point of, particularly in my early 20s, something of an egomaniac for pretty much my whole life. Now, that's with a healthy dose of self-deprecation. I mean, I'm not a crazy person, but I certainly, I was as confident as anyone could be that everything I was doing was entertaining by the time I was 3 years old. So much so that there was almost never a family event where I didn't force everyone to watch me sing the entire soundtrack to Sweeney Todd or whatever it was, nice. Assuming that everyone was having the best time ever watching this 5-year-old do this. And because of that, I'd spent my whole adolescence singing in the mirror, practicing what my music video moves would be like. I'd have my dad film me on a camcorder every day with my bass guitar. I'd sing along to all these punk songs that I loved and try to rehearse in a sense. And then I'd watch the videos back and see what worked and what didn't, or how my singing was. And, I come from kind of a sports upbringing. My dad was heavily into sports. I played sports my whole adolescence. And at that age, I treated rock star practice the same way that I did hockey practice or football practice or whatever else. It was, how do I get better at this? If I was singing poorly and my dad could hear me, he would come in the room and say, that doesn't sound good. You need to do it better. And it's frustrating when you're a little kid to hear that, but those tools were things that I took into my late teens. And by the time I'm shooting that video at 17, 18 years old, I kind of knew what I wanted to do. As far as the trajectory that my life went in, and when it comes to any kind of successes, those are things that I had imagined in my head and planned for. The stuff I didn't plan for was becoming dependent on alcohol and becoming a bigger ass than anybody could have expected. Those are the things that, as I got older, those were the surprises. By the time I'm 23, 24, I'm drinking all day long and life isn't as glorious and fun as I thought it was going to be. Those are the things that were the quote unquote wild ride. But as far as the positive stuff, this has been the plan since before I could make plans. This was the plan when I was a kid, and they would ask you, what are you going to be when you grow up in school? And I would say rock star. And then I had the teachers in rural Ohio explain to me that it's unlikely that a kid from the suburbs in rural Ohio is going to be able to be a rock star. I just never thought that they understood. And so that's always been the idea, is like, this is going to work. Now I just have to put in the work to make it work.
And it worked. Here we are. And looking to the future, the band is going to perform ReStitch These Wounds in full for the first time. It's happening Saturday, August 1st at the Whiskey A Go-Go, which will be streamable. How stoked are you to get back on stage? And how weird is it to not get that immediate reaction you're used to when you're on stage? You're giving it your all and nothing.
Yeah, this is the first year, it'll be a calendar year come August, that I haven't toured in my entire adult life. And generally speaking, toured extensively. So this is the longest I've gone without playing a show in a while. We played a one-off. It was meant to be the beginning of our tour, but then the tour got rescheduled right after that show. We played one show in Mexico City at the beginning of March, and it's just been nothing ever since. So it's not common for me to go from the late winter, early spring, all the way into the late summer without having played a single show. So it's more exciting than anything to me, the idea of getting on stage and playing with the band. We're in such a good place as a band right now that it's kind of a shame for us that we didn't get to carry that goodwill and positive momentum into a tour. But this will be fun too. This is the way that it has to be right now, and we understand that. And so we're prepared to deliver the best possible rock show that we can, just in a virtual medium. We're going to a place that is an iconic venue, a place that we, at the time when we did the tour for this record cycle originally a decade ago, played and headlined. And it'll be fun to go back there. We're bringing as much staging as we can fit into the Whiskey, all of our lights and everything that, obviously it's a smaller scale stage than we've been playing on, so we can't fit all the stuff on there, but we're going to try to bring the biggest and best rock show that we can, despite the fact that it's virtual. But the positive part about this is that anyone around the world can watch it. It doesn't matter where you are. You can be part of this experience. And so, there's positives and negatives, but the real joy for me and the excitement is, we're starting rehearsals, we're getting back out there, get to see our crew members again, and just all the things that are the fun parts of touring.
Again, that's Saturday, August 1st, details loudwire.com. So you touched on this earlier. Let's switch gears a little bit. How's the follow-up to Veil coming along? You've already shed some light on the fact that it's going to be a concept album. What can you divulge about the concept?
Nothing. I can't divulge anything about the concept because that would ruin the suspense. But
what can you share?
I will say it's, of all of the things that we've done, and we've now done, we did Wretched and Divine. Veil certainly had a concept behind it, and I did Ghost of Ohio personally, which was a kind of a concept record. But this is the most, I think, since Wretched and Divine, if not more so, the most flushed out idea in terms of there's a full story there. I've done all the character designs already. I'm working on a screenplay with Patrick Fogarty, as I said, my creative partner for years and years. We've been writing some of the coolest and most interesting material we ever have. We're trying to play with songs and sounds and things that we've never done before. The goal is just to move the band into kind of the next chapter, and I can't tell you how excited I am about it. It's been, every day is just such an exciting prospect to be able to quote unquote go to work, to go to the studio. And the other thing is that we're doing it on our own. This is going to be a record that Jake and is producing, and the band is self-producing it. And we feel like at this point in our career, 10 years in, nobody knows the band better than we do. And, we've got people that we work with who are buffers, so to speak. We're not living on an island and not letting anyone hear the stuff. We've got our management, and Blasco is there, and obviously we've got friends, and we're working with people that we've worked with before, whether it's Eric Ron or Scott Stevens or any of these people who we've written with or worked with before are listening to the material. So we're not doing it in an isolated sense where we want to make something with no input because we want to make the best record possible. But we love the idea of being able to do it on our own without somebody telling us what this band should sound like. And I feel like if we were ever going to do it, now is the time to do it. So it's just really exciting. It's a very expansive story. There's a lot of visual elements that'll be out there. And I think for fans of the band who love that kind of storytelling and world building that we've done over the years, I think this is kind of like, this is the best that we've ever done when it comes to that.
I thought it was kind of unique, and I don't know, I'm not a musician, right? But I read that when the idea for the concept album, the album came to you, you started drawing as opposed to maybe writing lyrics. I thought that was just a unique way to get it out.
Every record that we've done, I've started with the title first. I don't know why that's the way that I work, but I start with a title, and then generally speaking, I start drawing. My whole life, drawing and art has always been a way of kind of focusing my mind. And when I have a subject or something that I'm trying to deal with, drawing it out and putting it in front of me as a fleshed out thing that I can look at and go, this is what it is. It's helped me make more sense of kind of random ideas. So I have a notebook that every record I start a new notebook. And for this record, I started it when we did the 2 songs for the night. That was kind of the first pages, but then it quickly turned into what this record has become. And the first 6 or 7 pages are just drawings, and then character descriptions and breakdowns. And then I go into references, whether that's religious or historical references, pulling quotes from different texts, pulling quotes from different ideologies and belief systems, things that I want to build into the lyrical content, so that when I'm writing, I can reference my quotes that I have in there from different historical texts. I can reference the drawings that I have, and I can build a story and a narrative by having this kind of story Bible created already.
What do you do with those notebooks once the album is out?
I think the biggest problem for me is that when I was younger, I didn't really take good care of things. So a lot of them just ended up God knows where.
No.
And some of them ended up, the Wretched and Divine notebook ended up just with John Feldman, and then he moved a number of years ago to a different studio, and he hit me up and said, hey, I found this notebook full of drawings and things, and it was the notebook for Wretched and Divine. So I have that. Cool. I have the Ghost of Ohio notebook. I have a few of them, but unfortunately a lot of them have just been lost over the years.
I was going to say, those are going to be worth a lot of money. Start taking care of these things, Andy. What are you doing over there?
I know, yeah. Well, yeah, now I guess I'll certainly for posterity, if nothing else, to have these things that I can hold on to.
So what is the deal with the spinoff to American Satan, Paradise City? We know it has a rock star-studded cast, yourself included. It was also the last project of Cameron Boyce. I have a niece and a nephew who are obsessed with Descendants. I just think he's such a talented young man. So that was his last project before he passed. Just a bunch of huge names in this project. Do we know when and where it's coming? What can you share about the TV series? We saw the trailer and then it was like nothing.
Yeah, well, first of all, Cameron, it's one of those things where our characters don't share a storyline until kind of a certain point. So we have a lot of days where we weren't working together. But, when you're filming a series, everybody's on set at different times, and people are in their trailers or walking around or in their makeup trailer or whatever it is. And so I had the good fortune of spending some time with Cameron socially. We only worked together for 1 or 2 days on the show. But, boy, it's just one of those people who was so extraordinarily talented. Just you could pick it up immediately. The type of person that just has, I don't even know how to describe it. There's just almost a tangible star quality that people have when there's certain type of people that walk into a room and you just know that they're the star. And he just had that more than maybe anyone I've ever met, dancing around, singing, entertaining everybody. He was just a light of a person. And again, I didn't know him well, but the time that I spent around him, he was tremendous. And I remember last summer finding out that he had passed away, and it's just heartbreaking. And so the one thing I will say about this is that I've seen some of the footage and I've seen some of the stuff, and his performance in the show is just unbelievable. And if nothing else, to be able to be a part of something that includes this great young performer's final performance and it being so heartfelt and such a wonderful performance, that's a really great thing, obviously, given in the face of something that is so terrible. So I just wanted to mention that because I really do have the utmost respect for him. And it's just such a shame that he was lost so young. As far as the release date goes, basically the way it's sitting right now is the show is done, to my knowledge, or pretty close to being done, if not completely done. And now it's finding a home. There's been a lot of interest in the show. And the things that I hear that kind of come down the grapevine, but I've heard that there's a lot of interest in the show, and where it's going to live, I don't know yet, but it's coming soon. I know that much. I've completed all my parts for it, and I think all the other main cast has as well. And Ash, the director, is extremely excited about it. And so I think people will be seeing it sooner rather than later. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things, people ask me, and unlike people are used to when it comes to projects that I'm involved in, I'm the one who's kind of making the decision as to when it's going to happen. You know what I mean?
Right.
But when it comes to acting in something, it's not my baby, so to speak. It's Ash's, and it's something that he's done a tremendous job with. And I'm just, fortunately, I've just been put in a good position to know Ash, and for him to be interested in casting me in this role now twice in 2 different projects. It's just really cool for me.
We will keep our ears peeled. Ben Bruce seems like he'd be super fun to work with. I've only interviewed him twice, but he just seems like you'd be a blast to be around.
Yeah, Ben's wonderful. Probably I would say he and I have the closest connection, for obvious reasons, but of anybody in the cast. But, we've toured together a billion times over the years. And our first records came out within months of one another. Our band's trajectory was very similar. We were always either competing or touring together at the same time. And, what started as kind of a rivalry between the 2 bands in the early days turned into a very real friendship where, we did the co-headline tour together a couple of years ago. And I just love all those guys in Asking. And obviously just such a tremendous band. And Ben is one of the funniest, nicest, just most wonderful people in the world.
Very cool. Tell me about the Andy Show and what goes on there.
So the Andy Show is, when I was a little kid, I had a report card that I got that at the bottom, the teacher had written, "This is not the Andy Show." It was a meaning to kind of reprimand me for acting out or being the class clown or trying to make people laugh or whatever it was. And so my whole life, I always kind of laughed about the idea of, what will be the Andy Show? Because if that wasn't the Andy Show, I have to make the Andy Show a real thing. So the joke kind of in the initial stage was, let's do a podcast where we just joke and laugh and interview people from the scene and around the world and people in different walks of life and keep it light and enjoyable. And this will be the quote unquote Andy Show. So we started doing that in 2017. The show started out we were filming it all in the studio. And then as the show's evolved, we kind of tried to make it a little bit more of a personal experience for people, where we primarily do the show now. We converted one of the rooms in my house into our own little studio that kind of feels like my childhood bedroom in a way. And that's actually the room I'm sitting in right now. I put up a bunch of my old posters and action figures from when I was a little kid and all this kind of stuff. And the idea is that, when I was young, especially, I would constantly get in trouble for talking too much, or I could certainly be accused of someone who likes to hear the sound of their own voice. And so kind of poking fun at myself and playing on the idea that, I can't shut up. And so here's a show that I'm doing basically from my childhood bedroom, where it's just me and my friends, and particularly my co-hosts on the show are my cousin Joe, who's more like a brother to me. We grew up together, and I don't have any siblings, but Joe would be the closest thing. And we were best friends from the time we were babies. And so he's one of my co-hosts, and then my other co-host is Patrick Fogarty, who I mentioned before, is my constant collaborator on all things creative. And we do a podcast where we interview people in bands and different walks of life and music. And we do jokes, and we have fun, and we do little sketches. And now that we've been doing the show remotely because of the pandemic, we've implemented, now we're doing these kind of silly games. So we do an hour-long episode with the guest where we interview them and talk about different topics in their life and everything else. And then online every week we post a mini-sode, which is a silly game that I come up with the rules are insane and the idea is it's just complete chaos. But we do that every week.
Fun. All right, we'll wrap on this one. You've been incredibly generous with your time. Every time I read something where you're talking about your dad, the love kind of just jumps off the computer screen. When you become a father, I know you're a married man, what will be the number one thing you hope to instill in him or her that is a direct result of how your father raised you?
Support. And it's not about instilling in someone else. It's about showing it myself. My dad has, from the time I could move, every idea that I had that I wanted to do, he has supported me and done everything he could, whether it was me deciding at 3 years old that I was going to become a hockey player when no one in the family had ever played hockey or had any experience with it. And then the next day, him tearing up all the carpet in the basement of our first house and going to the used sporting goods store with me and getting me whatever gear I needed, and then learning himself how to skate so that he could teach me how to play hockey. From that on, it's always been, he's just cared so much. And the same goes for my mom as well. I'm very fortunate that both of my parents didn't treat me like I was a fool when I had aspirations or dreams. They treated it like something that needed to be worked towards, but that they believed I could do it if I was willing to put in the work. And that to me is the number one thing I want to show in my life. If my wife and I are able to have a child and have someone come into this world that is ours, the goal would be to be able to show them that I care and I support everything they do the way that I have had that my whole life, because I know that's not the case for everybody. And I know that I'm tremendously fortunate to have grown up with that kind of upbringing. And I want to be able to instill that in the future generation, because if it wasn't for that, I don't think that I would have had the kind of tenacity to just say, you know what, everything I think of will work if I make it work. And that was given to me by my parents and my dad. You can see him on Twitter or anywhere else. He's just the biggest fan and supporter of everything I do, and I can't tell you how much that has meant to me.
You believe it, you manifest it, and we're seeing it come to fruition. Many thanks to Andy Biersack, frontman for Black Veil Brides. ReStitch These Wounds arrives July 31st. A reminder, the band's going to perform ReStitch These Wounds in full for the first time Saturday, August 1st at the Whiskey A Go-Go, which will be streamable. Loudwire has your details. We'll keep our ears peeled for all the additional news. Andy, thank you so much. All the best to you and yours.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.